From the field to the film room to the war room, we've got you covered every step of the way as the road to the draft starts right now. Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 45 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half, and you can follow me on Twitter at halfandhalf_TPL. I'm joined today by two co-hosts that are going to be here for you through draft season. Up first, we've got Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow at Mark Henry Jr. _. We've also got the godfather of the Painted Lines, Deibs. You can find him on Twitter at Mr. Crockpot. Guys, how are you doing today?
Doing well, man. We're breaking down a class here, a group here that for me as an Eagles fan, I would have zero issues double dipping day one, day two here. I think this is the strongest group in the class by far, right up there with the wide receiver group. This class is stacked. We're going to deep dive into this.
Yeah, absolutely. We are breaking down today the edge class, a position that the Eagles have historically targeted on day 1 and 2 in a draft that is a little weaker than normal, but pretty top heavy at edge. I think it's safe to say that the Eagles will select one of the guys that we're going to be talking about today. So you might as well get a head start learning about those guys right here. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in here. Hold on. Let me pull up my graphic. I'm having all kinds of technical things happening today. So, okay. So here, yeah, so there's the spoiler, I guess, of what our top fives are. If you're listening later, you won't even see this if you're just listening on Apple Podcasts. But Deibs, why don't you kick us off with your number 5?
My number 5 here is Jermaine Johnson. Jermaine Johnson was one of the premier standouts of the Senior Bowl just a couple weeks ago. This guy was so dominant that he only practiced twice and skipped the rest of the week and skipped the Senior Bowl and sat out the rest of the week. He was just a stud. I actually did a video on this guy as he was one of my top guys to watch for the Senior Bowl, and he did not disappoint, man. The first thing to know about Jermaine Johnson here is that, 6'5", 262 pounds, elite athleticism. Secondly, unlike David Ojabo, which we'll get into, this guy is raw. He relies on being an elite athlete. Jermaine Johnson is the opposite of that. He actually possesses legit multiple ways of attacking the quarterback, spin moves, footwork, strong hands. If you ever get a second, watch some of his clips during the Senior Bowl. He can get it done in so many different ways. I think he's also a supremely underrated tackler. He had 70 tackles last year. And if you watch the tape, you'll find him chasing down running backs, disrupting the screen game. He gets after it, man. And he's got an elite motor. This guy is just a consistent threat off the edge. And he gets better and better as the game progresses. This is one of the true climbers of the draft right here. He's gone from like a late first round pick to he's in top 15 discussion. That's how far he is. About
we lost you there for a second, Deibs.
I was nervous that was me.
Oh, he's back now.
Can you hear me?
We lost you there for a second. Yeah, we lost you right after you said he was top 15.
Yeah, no, this is a top 15 discussion type of prospect. It'll depend on how much a team likes him or not, but I think the sky's the limit for this kid. He's right up there, not in the top 2 tiers that I have that we'll talk about today, but he's in that next tier, and I think he's that good.
All right. We'll go to my number 5 next. My number 5 is going to be Travon Walker. Travon Walker here. From Georgia, had 7.5 tackles for loss and 6 sacks this last season. This is a guy who he played on the edge primarily, but he rotated inside some. So if you're looking for a guy that can rush from a 3 technique and he can bounce outside, Walker is a piece that you can move around quite a bit. I wouldn't take him, primarily to play on the interior defensive line, but he's certainly capable of doing that. He was a top-level run defender last year at Georgia, and he wasn't really afforded a lot of opportunities just to purely pass rush. From the Eagles' perspective, we watch what the Eagles do with their defensive ends, where they're just that wide 9 or the 7-eye technique, and they're just able to get upfield. Walker wasn't really able to do that, but he flashed as a great run defender. He did well in pass rushing, even though that wasn't necessarily often his primary responsibility. One of the biggest ways he was used from the interior was as a stunt man, where he would loop around behind the defensive ends, and he's got explosiveness off the line to do that. He has a powerful bull rush on the interior. And when you look at him on the edge, he's got acceptable bend. He's not the most bendy guy in the draft, but he's able to turn corners off of the edge too. So he's one of those guys that as I watch him, he feels like he can do everything decently, but he hasn't really mastered anything. He's kind of that typical jack of all trades, master of none type of guy. One of the biggest things I think he needs to work on at the next level is learning how to chain his rush moves together. Like, he doesn't really have good secondary moves if he doesn't win with his first, his initial move. So I think this is a guy that ideally he's going to be drafted somewhere in the NFL where he's allowed to stick with one position and really learn all of the nuances with it before he's asked to move around a lot, which I think he's capable to do, but it's going to help his development if he can just get in a defensive scheme that's going to give him one priority and let him learn that really well. So Travon Walker, guy I'm really excited about, a guy I think could do a lot of different things for you with your defense as long as you don't overload him with too much too early.
Yeah, I'm moving on to me at number 5. I've also got the same player. I've got Travon Walker, and I think that he is the exact type of player that the Eagles would draft. He seems just to me to fit that mold of exactly who Howie would like in terms of his build and in terms of his versatility on the inside and the outside. And this guy is 6'5", 275. He's a 3-year starter at age 21. Not only is he a 3-year starter, he's a 3-year starter on Georgia, who just won the national championship. They just had the best defense, one of the best defenses of all time. If you break down the numbers over a season, and he had his best year this year and his last year at Georgia, coincidentally, coinciding with Georgia having one of the best defenses of all time, winning a national championship. And he stayed healthy for all 3 years. He had 6 sacks this year, 7.5 tackles for a loss. He will throw his hands up when there's a pass whizzing by his head, which is always something that I think is incredibly important with DNs. I think there's been a good amount of DNs who have really bolstered their legacy and their level in the game just by being huge aspects of, you have to move where you are if you're a quarterback in the pocket to see over these guys and to throw over these guys, to not risk a tipped interception or a wasted play. And like you guys said, he can move inside and out. Georgia used him in multiple ways. So this is a guy, like I said, who the Eagles, I think, will have a ton of interest in. And I think there's going to be a ton of teams with a ton of interest in him with the way that he flashed on such a great defense. When you have as many NFL prospects on one defense as Georgia did have, and you're watching film and Travon Walker's still jumping out at you, that shows just how good of a prospect this guy is. But I do think he is a little bit behind my number 4. Like, I think that my top 4 is pretty set in stone. I couldn't see anyone else breaking into that. And for this, we'll talk about it in honorable mention, but Travon Walker is kind of the start of another tier for me at this position with one of the guys Deibs talked about, and Jermaine Johnson and some other folks.
All right, so at number 5, Deibs has Jermaine Johnson. Mark and I both have Travon Walker. Deibs, who is your number 4?
Yeah, man, I love hearing the Travon Walker talk. I love this kid. He's one of my favorite prospects in this draft. I've been kind of high on him, and I've gotten a lot of slack on YouTube because of it. But here we are. I think he's absolutely climbing up the draft boards here, and that's only going to go up and up and up as we hit pro days next month. For me, you guys nailed it. I think he fits the Eagles to a T. He's got elite versatility. He can play inside. He can play outside. He's well balanced. Just as much as he can attack the passer, he can stop the run. His athleticism is insane. He's got insane bend, 6'5", 275 pounds. And I think what the biggest thing here about Trey Walker that we didn't touch on yet is Georgia rotates a ton with their defensive line. A lot of those guys on the defensive line don't play as many snaps as David Ojabo or Aidan Hutchinson or Kayvon Thibodeaux. I guarantee you, if Trey Walker was on a different team, a very good team, he would be probably top 10 in this class. That's how I look at Trey Walker. You look at kind of that versatility. Georgia aligned him in many different ways. Many times during watching tape, you could see him drop back, bat down passes. He can thrive in coverage. This is a 3-down edge rusher that the Eagles really, really could use on the outside. So he can do it all, like you said, Shane. So for me, I'm really high on this guy. He's my number 4. But a lot of these guys, like you lump together, like these are all like top 20 guys in the draft for me. It's kind of like pick your poison. I love them all, and Trey Walker is my number 4.
I think it's very possible you're going to see 4 to 5 edges come off the board before the Eagles pick in the mid-teens. Because it's not a dominant quarterback class, but it is a pretty good edge class. So my number 4, my edge 4 is going to be Aidan Hutchinson out of Michigan. It might be a little surprising to people. I know that Aidan Hutchinson has been listed as the number 1 player by some guys on their big boards, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, if we look at who is purely going to be the best player right out of the gate week 1 of their rookie season out of this edge class, I think it's probably Aidan Hutchinson. I think he is a very high floor player. I'm concerned a little bit about some of the athletic traits he has to continue to develop his game at the next level. So Hutchinson missed most of the 2020 season with a fractured leg, but he took a huge leap in 2021, had a school record at Michigan, 14 sacks, 16.5 tackles for loss, which led him to be a first-team All-American and Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. Watching him on tape, he is more of a power rusher than a speed rusher. One of his go-tos, he's really good at threatening a tackle's outside shoulder and then countering back inside. Kind of by virtue of being such a good power rusher, those guys typically are pretty good run defenders as well, and Hutchinson's no different. He excels as a run defender. One of the biggest issues I see watching him on tape is that he just lacks the bend that you like to see from edge rushers. And even as a run defender, he's powerful, but he tends to play too upright. At 6'5", he tends to not get down. Guys are able to get under his pad level and drive him off a spot sometimes. This is a guy that, he spot dropped a little bit when he was at Michigan. He never really looked comfortable doing it. It's not something I would be asking him to do at the next level. He can play anywhere, though. He also lined up inside some, although, again, primarily you're looking at him to be an edge defender for you. I think, the big comparison everybody is going to go back and forth all draft cycle is between Hutchinson and Kayvon Thibodeaux, which is most people's edge 1 and 2. And we'll get into this more in just a minute. But for me, Hutchinson's a better player right now. But the reason I have him lower on my board is he just doesn't have that athleticism and that ceiling that Kayvon Thibodeaux does. Like, Hutchinson can use his technique to make these corners softer, and then he can get around them with lesser physical skills. Whereas Thibodeaux just runs around guys. And that's a hole in Thibodeaux's game that I'll talk about that he's going to have to develop. But when you look purely at the upside, these other 3 guys, I think, have more upside than Hutchinson, although perhaps a lower floor.
Wow. I did not think I'd be the one that doesn't get yelled at by Michigan fans after this podcast. But I'm not huge on Hutchinson either. It's funny that I ended up ranking him 2 in such a great draft class. But I do think that the gap between Hutchinson and the other 2 guys that we're going to talk about is greatly exaggerated. So I will talk about my number 4, which is David Ojabo, also from Michigan. So I guess they can't be too upset with me, but David Ojabo is only a 1-year starter. That's going to be kind of the thing that I think people bring up that they're a little bit nervous about. For me, that's kind of exciting because of what we saw in that 1 year. It's hard to argue that the ceiling is kind of limitless for David Ojabo on what type of player he can be in the NFL. I really do think he's one of the players in the draft class with the highest upside. He had 12 tackles for loss, 11 sacks in that 1 year. He also had 3 pass deflections. He's a guy who's 6'5". He can throw those hands up in the passing game. He had 5 forced fumbles. This guy was wreaking havoc in the backfield, and he was doing it in big games. And I think that he went under the radar a lot of the time with how much buzz Aidan Hutchinson was getting over the year. Now, like Deibs said, I do think that Aidan Hutchinson's more of a sure thing. I think that he probably doesn't have quite the upside that Ojabo has, which is why I have Ojabo at 4 in terms of I don't think he's quite as safe. And I do think that there's a couple scenarios where maybe Ojabo and Hutchinson were both kind of benefiting off of each other a little bit. And maybe they both kind of propped each other up a little bit higher. That's obviously something we'll see as we get into their NFL career. But this is a guy that, I mean, some people have compared him to Brian Burns, who drafted by Carolina a couple of years ago. He's been really, really good as a pro. Ojabo has shown that he's really good against the run, as well as all the stats that I mentioned against the pass. And obviously, they don't make his build, they don't make his athleticism in a warehouse. Like, he is a special freak athlete and freak body type. So there's not a lot of David Ojabos growing off of trees. So there's definitely risk there with Ojabo. I do think that there's a pretty good amount of risk there for a top 15, top 20 guy, but the upside is undeniable.
All right. So going back-to-back Michigan players here. Deibs, kick us off with your number 3.
So I did not have David Ojabo on my list. I have him really high as well. I definitely think top 20 all the way. I like Trey Walker. I like Jermaine Johnson. The only issue with David Ojabo is the guy got literally swallowed up in big games. You look at kind of him going up against bigger tackles, bigger offensive linemen. He struggled, man. He really, truly struggled against top-notch competition. That's the only thing that I'll say about David Ojabo. Although he's terrific, he's super raw. But like you said, Mark, his ceiling is as high or higher than Aidan Hutchinson. My number 3 here is George Karlaftis out of Purdue. I've got a top 15 grade on this guy. Just one of the most athletic, physically impressive edge rushers in this class, man. 6'4", 275 pounds. I think this is a plug and play, 3-down starter coming off the edge. I think he's super well-rounded. He doesn't have elite length like Ojabo, like Kayvon Thibodeaux, but this guy makes up for it with just pure technique, pure strength, pure power. If you watch the tape on George Karlaftis, you'll routinely see him. It's so funny. He'll literally throw quarterbacks around like they're rag dolls. It's awesome. The second this guy gets his hands on guys, they drop. They literally just drop. It's really cool to watch. So I'm a little surprised that we've kind of seen his draft stock drop a little bit. A big part of that is because you have some other guys like Jermaine Johnson and Trey Walker rising just a tad. You look at what the Eagles need. They need they need an edge rusher that can dominate against the run, against the pass. He'd be a clear fit. This is the guy. This is the guy for me. If we're we just got out of the top 10 on draft night, and if he's just floating there, I'm trading up if I'm Howie Roseman. I'm going to get this guy. I'll do whatever I can to get this guy starting in midnight green for the Philadelphia Eagles, man. This is my guy. I have my other two just a couple tiers better, but I love this guy. I think he's just one of those just surefire, edge rusher prospects, man. He's terrific.
Yeah. All right. So that's George Karlaftis, Deibs number 3. For my number 3, I'm going to go back to the guy that Mark just talked about. It is David Ojabo from Michigan. So I'm a little higher on Ojabo than I am Hutchinson. For me, it's all about, like I said, those athletic traits. Ojabo didn't play football until his junior year of high school. He was a 1-year starter at Michigan, and in that 1 year, he had 11 sacks and 12 tackles for loss. So he's not going to be the most technically sound guy, but he's won with athleticism at Michigan. He's got a quick first step. He's got speed for days to threaten the edge. This guy, he won a state title in the 100-meter dash in high school. So he can run down scrambling quarterbacks. He can run down running backs off of the backside. But just talking about rushing off the edge, he's got a really nice spin move. One of the things he really likes to do is threaten the outside and then spin back to the inside. He's also got a lot of bend if he just wants to try to turn the corner. He can win in the run game if he beats a blocker to a spot, but he's struggled throughout his year at Michigan to kind of deconstruct blocks. And so that's something to keep an eye on with him. If he can read the play and beat the guy there, he's in great shape, but sometimes that doesn't happen and his run presence kind of falls apart. I think that Ojabo has a higher ceiling than any edge in this class, except for Kayvon Thibodeaux. He's got all the physical traits, but he lacks the experience, and he could be a liability in the run game early on. This might be a guy that maybe he's a 2-down pass rusher for you early in his career as you try to develop those other parts of his game. So I think it's a high ceiling with this guy. Of all of the guys that I will mention today, discounting honorable mention guys at the end, I think he's the most likely to bust as well. But the physical traits really have me excited about Ojabo, and I'd be happy to see him in midnight green.
He's like Malik Willis. He's just a wild card, man. If it clicks, man, you got one hell of a player, man.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, give us your number 3.
You're muted, man. Did I do Karlaftis or Hutchinson here? Because I have them exactly tied in my rankings. Yeah, I have George Karlaftis at 3. I think that you could argue, you could tell me on like tomorrow that I have Karlaftis ranked 2 and Hutchinson ranked 3, but these two are exactly tied in my brain. But I'll talk about George Karlaftis. This has been the guy that, above all in this class, that I've kind of been obsessed with since September. I mean, I've been talking about George Karlaftis since the first couple Purdue games this year. 6'4", 275, just an absolute freak in the weight room. Bruce Feldman, he's a guy who does draft articles, and he puts out a freaks list every year for the draft. And he was putting out some of the stuff that this guy's done in terms of in the weight room and power cleaning and squatting. And it's like squatting 505 pounds. Karlaftis is a freak who just throws around offensive linemen like they're barbells. I mean, this guy is just a power guy. And this is a guy that I think he's the most NFL ready D-end in the class. I think Hutchinson is right there with him in terms of NFL readiness, but we saw Karlaftis step in as a freshman and right away start wreaking havoc. He actually probably had his best year as a freshman in terms of his production. His freshman year in 2019, he had 8 sacks, 17 tackles for loss, and 55 tackles in 12 games. And that he showed immediately while he was a 4-star recruit, one of the best recruits ever at Purdue. His production in terms of just looking at the numbers this year, it won't wow you. It doesn't blow you away. He only had 4.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 39 tackles in 12 games. But you turn on the film, and that'll definitely blow you away. And you're seeing teams in the Big Ten devoting 2 to 3 blockers at Karlaftis, and he was the entire Purdue defense. You could pretty much focus on Karlaftis, and no one else on that Purdue defense was going to beat you. So, and he still, even in those games, made big plays and got so much attention that allowed for other things. He can bull rush. He can win with power inside and outside. He's super versatile. You can line him up wherever you want on the defensive line. He reminds me of a Justin Smith from years back from the 49ers, just a brute strength type of defensive end who I think this is a guy who could step in right away and, compete for a Pro Bowl. Like, I think this is the type of guy who's just, going to step in and be one of the top players at his position. And that's why I have him as a top 5 player overall, even if I have him right now 3rd at his position.
All right. So that takes us through our top 3 just by way of review. Mark went Travon Walker, David Ojabo, George Karlaftis. I have gone Travon Walker, Aidan Hutchinson, David Ojabo, and Deibs has gone Jermaine Johnson, Travon Walker, and George Karlaftis. So Deibs, kick us off here with your edge 2 in this class.
Aidan Hutchinson for me, man. Talk about a guy that comes up big on the biggest stage, man. This is a guy who had 15 pressures against Ohio State. He had 12 sacks last year. He had 6 during the last 3 games of the regular season. That's what scouts remember most here. I have this guy pegged as a top 5 pick on my draft board. I think he's just one of the purest pass rushing weapons in this entire class. Great hands. He's got great burst. He's got great technique. His strength off the line of scrimmage is elite. There's really not a lot this guy can't do. When you watch him on tape, there's a guy who rarely gets pushed back off the line of scrimmage. He's really impressive, man. I think his motor is also off the charts. Similar to like Jermaine Johnson, like this is a guy that like he gets down and dirty, man. When the game is on the line, he's always in the backfield making plays. This is my number 2. I think he's terrific. There's just one little trait that I like a little bit more from my number 1 on my big board, but Aidan Hutchinson's terrific. Top 5 for me.
All right. So Aidan Hutchinson for Deibs. My number 2 is going to be George Karlaftis, the guy that you guys have both already talked about, but he comes in at my number 2. He had 17 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks as a freshman before he injured his leg during the 2020 season. He came back strong this year, 10 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. like Mark was saying, not the most eye-popping statistics, but if you turn on the tape, you see a guy that his play did not take a dip from that freshman season. Overall, Karlaftis just has elite athleticism. He was a two-time Indiana State champ in the shot put. He starred on an under-16 Greek national water polo team as a 13-year-old. So multi-sport athlete, has a lot of athleticism. He has an explosive first stem in his pass rushing. He loves to convert speed to power off of the edge. And I would say that's kind of his go-to is bull rushing off of the edge. I will say a negative. It seems like sometimes when I'm watching him, he kind of gets out of control on his rushes. He'll overrun the pocket at times. And he doesn't have that flexibility to really dip on the edge. But if we're talking purely as a power rusher, he's a better power rusher than Hutchinson. I would say he's got more limitations in his flexibility, but purely as a power rusher, this is the best guy in the class. He is very technically sound. One of the things that amazed me watching him is just he's so good at like reading the offensive tackle's weight distributions and leveraging the offensive tackle's balance against him. And I would say that's one of the most impressive things that I saw from him. I think, ideally, this is going to be a 4-3 defensive end. This is not a guy that you want to put in a 2-point stance. He's not a guy that you probably want to use in hybrid schemes, but he's going to be a great fit for a 4-3 team. And again, would be a great fit for the Eagles, especially, as Brandon Graham ages out, and he's got a lot of that same type of style in his play with the power rushing off the edge. So George Karlaftis, my number 2.
This would be a great move. Just like Devontae last year, you trade up a few spots, get the guy, and you get a starter for 10 years, man. 10 years. I hope Karlaftis is wearing Eagles green, man.
Yeah, it's funny because I have this guy ranked too, Aidan Hutchinson over George Karlaftis. But if the Eagles traded up for Karlaftis or Hutchinson, I'd be probably more excited about Karlaftis. So I don't even know what that says about my ranking. But Aidan Hutchinson's really, 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 really good.
Sometimes your overall rankings are swayed some by scheme fit. So
yeah, for sure.
You could have a guy number 2, but know that the number 3 guy fits the scheme a little better too.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. But yeah, Aidan Hutchinson's really, really, really good. You've heard it all year on ESPN. You've heard it, when he got a fake invite to the Heisman ceremony, which I think is garbage. I think if you're going to be invited to the Heisman ceremony as a defensive player, you should have Ndamukong Suh level impact and numbers. I don't think Hutchinson had that, but he was on a big team. He was on Michigan. So I don't know why I'm shitting on Aidan Hutchinson while I'm supposed to be talking good about him. But I really do think that he's the third Bosa brother. I think that he falls right in line with Joey and Nick Bosa. Not quite as high upside, in my opinion, but I do think that he's the type of player like the Bosas that will come in and make their presence known right away. He's 6'6", 265, 14 sacks, 16.5 tackles for loss, 62 tackles in 14 games this year. Played 2 games in 2020, obviously the COVID-shortened year, and he missed a little time with injuries. His first big year was 2021. So kind of like Ojabo, you look at him and it's like, oh, only really 1 year of that top level first round production. But you look at the tape and, it's hard to ignore just how good he was against teams like Penn State, Ohio State, and other top teams in the Big Ten. He did have a really tough time against Michigan, as did Ojabo, or against Georgia, I should say, as did Ojabo. They both struggled mightily in that college football playoff game. But Aidan Hutchinson's a pretty rock solid option, in my opinion, in the top 10 of this class, top 5 of this class. Where I would kind of raise my eyebrows is to see a player like Aidan Hutchinson go number 1 overall in the class when I don't think he's the best player at his position. That would definitely bother me as a decision from Jacksonville at the number 1 slot. But that's something for another podcast. That's something for another day. But Aidan Hutchinson, super safe, super talented guy, will make an impact right away.
All right, so that brings us to our number 1. Spoiler alert, they're all the same. Deibs, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, Thibodeaux is awesome, man. I have a top 5 grade on this guy. Against the run, dude, his athleticism just screams off the tape, especially when he gets in the backfield. Against the pass, really strong as a pass rusher. His physical tools are off the charts, man. He's got elite strength, elite length. He bullies offensive linemen off the line of scrimmage. I think he's got – getting some feedback here.
My bad.
It's okay. He's got just a variety of pass rush moves that are just unbeatable. I think for me, though, his versatility is what's really fun about this guy. At Oregon, he was, kind of playing some linebacker. He was in the slot. Like, he was all over the place, man, all over. And he holds his own. He's got it all. And I think just his lateral ability, his athleticism, and then just feel for the game are just head and shoulders above everyone else. I have Kayvon Thibodeaux in a tier above everyone else in my rankings here. It's just insane to me that we're sitting here debating whether or not it should be him or Aidan Hutchinson. And that's a huge compliment to how good Aidan Hutchinson was for Michigan this year. But it's still Kayvon Thibodeaux. That's where it's at. And I've never wavered. For me, he's my number one pick.
Yeah, I have, 2 through 4 on my list are pretty close together. I've got a pretty sizable gap to number 1 and to number 5. Like 2 through 4, you could really put in about any order for me, but Kayvon Thibodeaux is the guy. He's always been the guy. He was the number 1 ranked recruit out of high school when he went to Oregon, produced 19 sacks in 3 years, which isn't a lot necessarily. I mean, remember 2020 was a COVID shortened year, but that is one knock on him, that his production has never quite matched up to his traits. But I feel confident that he's going to get better coaching and scheming at the NFL than he did at Oregon. And I think you're going to see this guy really blossom. He has an elite first step. He's got great flexibility to bend around the edge. Like, you'll watch this guy and he's like, it's like he's almost like parallel to the ground and he's still running. It's phenomenal. I don't even know how he can do that, but he's solid in run defense. He shows high effort, chasing plays down from the backside. I will note he sometimes struggles to disengage from blocks, similar to Ojabo, although I'd say he's better at it than Ojabo. But he's not just a speed rusher. He can transition from speed to power well. So, an offensive tackle, he can keep him guessing. You get hands on him, but then he can just transition to power and drive you off your back foot. I would say his biggest room for growth is in developing hand counters. He's not the best, at landing those punches, at countering the offensive tackle once hands are on him. I think, like Deibs said, this is a highly versatile guy. You could draft him to play in an even or an odd front. It doesn't matter. Like, you could bulk him up a little bit and he could play a 4-3 defensive end. He could stand up in a 2-point stance as a 3-4 outside linebacker. He spot dropped some at Oregon and he looked okay doing it. I mean, you don't want to draft this guy and ask him to spot drop a lot, but he could do it for you adequately. Hybrid scheme can move him around. I see Joe Ciccoletti chiming in, says a lot of hoping and praying for Thibodeaux to fall to 8 to the Falcons, but expect him to go top 3. Yeah, I can't really see this guy making it out of the top 3 unless teams just start talking themselves into quarterbacks as we get closer to the draft, which sometimes happens. But if Thibodeaux makes it out of the top 3, this would be a huge steal for any team.
So a report on that came out today. Thibodeaux said that he expects to be taken by the Giants at 5. I guess he told that to Colin Cowherd, which that'd be brutal as Eagles fans.
That can't happen.
Yeah, that'd be brutal. It's almost worth trading up to 4 to prevent that from happening if that ends up being the case. But I have Kayvon Thibodeaux number 1 on my DN rankings at all. And spoiler alert, I have him number 1 overall in the draft class. He's my number 1 player. He's not the best player in the draft class. That belongs to a Notre Dame Fighting Irishman, named Kyle Hamilton. But he's I don't think there's that much bias there. Kyle Hamilton's ranked top 5 everywhere, but I think he's the best player, but I wouldn't take Kyle Hamilton number 1 because he's a safety. So I don't think it's close, though. I think Kyle Hamilton's by far the best player, but the end is so important. I mean, you need a pass rusher in the NFL. Even if I think that one player is not as good as the other, safety is just the positional value of the end in comparison to safety it's not even measurable. But Kayvon Thibodeaux is just an absolute freak. There's 2 players that jump out to me in terms of a comp, and I really hope he's the former instead of the latter. So the positive comp would be for Chase Young. I think that there is a ton of Chase Young to his game in the way that he can stop the run, the way that he can get after the passer. There's also, in terms of what Shane said, where the production hasn't quite matched the traits, that would remind me a little bit of Jadeveon Clowney, which is Jadeveon Clowney, not a bust, not a bad player. He definitely has bounced around the league a little bit for someone who came in with such high pedigree, someone who was in no doubt about it, number 1 pick. I wouldn't say that he's lived up to what people thought Clowney would be. So you hope that Thibodeau's more like a Chase Young than a Jadeveon Clowney. And I think he is. I think he's an absolute freak athlete. And I think that the production will start to line up with the traits. He had 7 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, 49 tackles in 10 games. So it's not like he had bad numbers, just not eye-popping numbers. Like we said, he's a freak. He's 6'5", 258, former 5-star recruit. He was the number 2 overall prospect as a recruit in the entire country, which is pretty hard to do at DN. 3-year starter at Oregon, started right away, 20 sacks and 35 and a half tackles for loss in the career. Looks to get his hands up in the passing lane. He's got the frame to line up all over the defensive line. So I think Kayvon Thibodeaux is a no doubt about it, number 1 pick in this draft, even if there is risk there. There's definite inherent risk there that he could be a Jadeveon Clowney type player, but that's the risk to me. I think the risk is he's a starter and not a top flight, top level D end at the position. I think his floor, due to the traits, is so high. So I don't mind taking that swing and taking that risk that he can be a Chase Young level type defensive end.
Yep. All right. So to recap, Deibs' top 5 was Jermaine Johnson 5, Travon Walker 4, George Karlaftis 3, Aidan Hutchinson 2, Kayvon Thibodeaux 1. I went number 5, Travon Walker, 4, Aidan Hutchinson, 3, David Ojabo, 2, George Karlaftis, 1, Kayvon Thibodeaux. And Mark went Travon Walker 5, David Ojabo 4, George Karlaftis 3, Aidan Hutchinson 2, Kayvon Thibodeaux number 1. So that rounds out our top 5 edge rankings, but stick around. We've got some bonus content for you. We've got a few honorable mentions that we wanted to throw out. Maybe some guys that just missed our top 5, or maybe some day 2, day 3 guys that we like. Deibs, do you got an honorable mention you want to throw out for us?
Yeah, I've got a couple. My first one is another guy that had a really strong Senior Bowl, and that is Kingsley Enagbare out of, I believe, South Carolina. 6'4", 260 plus pounds, a ton of versatility. He's great at getting to the quarterback. That's definitely a name to keep an eye on. He's definitely climbing the boards. He was like, a day 2 kind of guy, but I think he's in that area where he could leap, possibly maybe late first round area. He's got a ton of length. You talk about a raw prospect, just tons you can do with Kingsley Enagbare, and he's got production too at South Carolina. And the other guy I've got is Myjai Sanders. Didn't have that good of a week at the Senior Bowl. Like that was a guy that I was really excited to see how he would look. He needs to add bulk. You look at his tape, man. He's got really thin legs, but he's got everything you look for. He's got super long arms. His length is crazy, 6'5", great off the edge, great bend, great at getting to the quarterback. I think just a year in the NFL, just building up strength and technique is going to do him wonders. Another guy that has just so much potential. When I think of Myjai Sanders, I think of like last year's edge class, and where Myjai Sanders would be in last year's class. He'd probably be among the top. That's how deep this class is. So those are my 2 guys that I think in rounds 2, like if the Eagles get a premier edge rusher in first round, like at 15 or 16, like Karlaftis, if they're lucky, if Jermaine Johnson or Travon Walker, and Myjai Sanders sitting there in round 2, boom, you've got 2 elite edge rushers to work with moving forward, because that is a major position of need for the Eagles. Those are my 2 guys.
Yeah, and he's a guy that definitely may have put himself down more into that range with his Senior Bowl performance, like you mentioned. So my honorable mention guy is going to be out of the University of Oklahoma, Nick Bonito. I'm not biased at all. I'm an OU fan. So I'm going to shout out these guys when I can. But Nick Bonito, he's kind of an undersized edge rusher. He's 6'2", 231 pounds. He rushed primarily at Oklahoma out of a 2-point stance with outstanding athleticism. He had 9 sacks with 11 and a half tackles for loss last year, 7 sacks and 15 tackles for loss this year. He's a really good speed rusher off the edge, as you would expect with that size. He's got an explosive first step. He's a guy that looks to threaten that outside shoulder, and then once he gets a tackle to start oversetting, he tries to get it back inside. He's got great lateral agility in the run game. He sets the edge well. He's able to disengage blocks and locate the ball better than you would expect someone of his size. He's got a high football IQ, really instinctual player. And he played a lot of roles in the OU defense. He spied on quarterbacks. He pass rushed. He dropped into zone coverage. Now, he's undersized, which makes him a little bit of a tweener at the next level. I think if you look to get him, you're looking at him as a 3-4 outside linebacker, probably just kind of a pass rushing specialist, not a guy that you're going to have out there for 3 downs. Maybe he could be a 4-3. Like I said, he showed good instincts in pass coverage, but that's a lot more of a projection because it's not what he did at OU. So I've got a late 2nd round, early 3rd round grade on him. I think he's going to be available into mid to late day 2. And I think he can make a 3-4 team pretty happy on the edge.
Yeah, Myjai Sanders was the guy that I was going to talk about. Deibs made a good pick there talking about Myjai. He did kind of let down on his production this year, which coming into this year, I was probably higher on Myjai Sanders than I am coming out of this year, I guess, which is not a great thing to say about him. But he's a guy that I'm absolutely interested in the top 50, top 40 of this draft class, depending on how the back end of this first round shakes out and how the top of the second round shakes out. And another guy that I don't, unless I zoned out there for a second, I don't think anyone's mentioned is Arnold Ebiketie. I don't know how to say his name. That's Penn State gives me players every year that I can't pronounce. But how do you say it?
Dude, he started out at Temple and then transferred to Penn State, and now he's the household name. So it's Arnold Ebiketie.
Beckety. I like that better. That rolls off the tongue better. He's a guy that the traits don't drive you wild. I mean, he's only a 6'2" player. He's not crazy athletic. He doesn't pop off the screen on tape, but he had a breakout year and he does make plays happen in the backfield. He stops the run. He's incredibly versatile. Penn State's defense, their front seven, they've done a good job churning out athletes in these last couple of years, especially last year with 2 really good front 7 guys coming out in the first round. So it looks like more of the same. It seems like he might even be a little bit of a riser in this draft. And I've seen people talk about him as a first round prospect at times. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And it'll be interesting to see how many times I botch that pronunciation.
He definitely makes the all name team.
Yeah.
I remember how accomplished I felt when I learned how to say Halapulavati Vaitai's name. I spent like a solid day on that after the Eagles drafted him.
Love it. He was dominant for Temple, man. He was by far their best player, and that really hurt when he transferred out to Penn State last year. And I'm really happy to see him just dominate. He was just by far one of the most impactful guys on that Penn State defense. One other guy I want to have worth mentioning. Absolutely crushed the Senior Bowl. He's one of those tweeners, but he has a ton of size, a ton of athleticism. That is Logan Hall out of Houston. That is someone that a lot of people are talking about. He can play inside. He can play outside. He'll mostly play inside, but definitely a 3-down edge guy, interior defensive tackle, whatever you want to call it. Like if he gets in the right system, I think that guy is going to do a lot of damage. He's my number 2. I'm working on my interior defensive lineman right now rankings. He's my number 2. I think he's a stud.
All right. Anybody got anything? Anybody else that they want to throw out there?
I guess I'll just throw it out there so people don't think we're forgetting about someone. Like Dive said, we're going to do our interior defensive line rankings. I have seen DeMarvin Leal listed some places as not just an interior D lineman. He is versatile. He could probably play both sides. He's awesome. He will be number 1 on all of our interior defensive line rankings. If I had to guess. Oh, wow. Maybe I'm wrong then.
No, I think I have him like 4th or 5th.
Wait, interior D line? Am I crazy? Right? Oh, I guess there's a couple. There's a couple people that jumped. Yeah, I just completely. I'm in I'm in edge ranking mode. But yeah, DeMarvin Leal's a guy who I really, really, really like. So we'll talk about him more at length next week. But he's a guy who could play edge a little bit too.
Yeah, it gets a little interesting. Where do you decide to divide guys? Because some of the guys play both, and then you've got you guys that's like, well, you're going to put him as an off-ball linebacker or an edge, and there's a lot of nuance there. So if there's a guy that you're just sure we missed, we've probably got him categorized somewhere else, and we'll get there down the road.
My issue with DeMarvin Leal is like he's not elite at anything. Like he's like that. Where Logan Hall is like 6'5". He's a monster. He's strong, great hands. Great athleticism. DeMarvin Leal is kind of a pass rusher, but playing on the inside, and he's not good against the run. So I feel like that guy doesn't have a role in the NFL, and he's going to need a year to get coached, learn some technique, especially reacting better against the run. That's the thing I saw on DeMarvin Leal. So
Yeah, he's definitely raw. He was going into this year. I didn't understand the hype for him really, and that he definitely impressed me. But the thing about him is like it's kind of similar to in a different way to Thibodeaux. He came in with so much pedigree, and he came in as such a high recruit that he's got those traits that you look at and you're like, we got to get it out of him. It's one of those types of things. I agree with you that he's super raw though, for sure.
I think didn't he start? He's a true junior. I think he started every single year in college. So
he was a huge
five-star recruit. Yeah, 5-star recruit.
All right. Well, that's going to about wrap it up for our top 5 edge rankings. This is our second podcast in our off-season preparation for the draft, positional rankings. We've already done quarterback. That's episode 43 of Chalk Talk. So if you missed that, just scroll up a little bit on the feed and you can find that. We'll be back next week to break down another position, although we haven't decided which one yet. So, but we'll let you guys know, and we'll be back here. So you guys keep it tuned to the Painted Lines for all your draft needs. Before we get out of here, Mark or Deibs, do either of you have any final thoughts for us?
Mark, we'll go first.
Yeah, sure. Keep it locked to my Twitter, obviously, but there's definitely an announcement coming within the next week and a half. So keep it locked to my Twitter and keep it locked to Fox PHL The Gambler, which is an iHeart radio station, which I'm on quite often and will be on more often going forward soon.
Yeah, I'm working on my interior defensive lineman rankings. I've got safeties, cornerbacks, linebackers, edge rushers, quarterbacks, wide receivers, and now I'm working on interior defensive linemen. All top 10 out there already. Ton of fun, man. Ton of fun. This is the best. I'm really excited to start truly cracking on my big boards here because that's where we're at now.
Yeah, we're going to get into some mock draft shows, some off-season simulations. We'll keep going with the positional rankings. So you guys keep it tuned right here to Chalk Talk, to the Painted Lines, and we'll have you ready for the draft, culminating in our live draft show when we get there in April.
And if you think there's disagreements with these positional rankings, when we get to the overall big board, me and Shane were at each other's throats last year. So it'll start getting testy in here when we get our big boards together.
You know, it's a semester, or not a semester, it's season of podcasting, week in, week out, game reviews and previews with you. It made me I was like, Mark and I pretty much agree on everything. And I went back and I was rewatching our first round podcast from last year, just kind of thinking through what I wanted to do for this year. And I was like, oh man, Mark and I we're at each other's throats about everything come draft time. So it's interesting. We'll see if that trend holds true. Maybe we just agree about in-season stuff and fight about the draft. I guess we'll find out this year.
Well, our rankings haven't been too different. So not yet, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for episode number 45 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, be sure you smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow us all on Twitter. I'm at _TPL. Mark is at Mark Henry Jr. Deibs is at Mr. Crockpot. So from me, from Mark, from Deibs, and from the Painted Lines, we'll see you guys next time.